Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. Today we are continuing to explore Eudora Welty's only children's novel by The Shoebird by reading some of the other writings that Welty has related to children's literature, today focusing on her reviews. My name is Anna Traylor. I am the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. So first, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the bottom of your screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box now and again, and I will share a complete chat transcript at the end of the series in your newsletter. So with that, Suzanne, where shall we begin today's discussion?
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about Eudora Welty as a reader of children's fiction. And then I'd like for us to talk about what we think her reviews of these books of children's literature tell us about her own work. So let's do both. Let's talk about each of these reviews and what standard she's applying, what judgment she comes to, and then let's talk about what that might tell us about her own writing of fiction. I want to mention that next week, Alice Mitchell, who is a member of our group and is a children's writer, is going to talk a little bit about her own work in children's literature. So we'll look forward to that, in addition to talking about the essays that Eudora Welty wrote about children's literature. Okay, let's start off with her fairy tale review. The reviews of three books of collections of fairy tales. A review published in 1945, which is a significant thing. So we have, I don't know how to pronounce, I'll try, Sigrid Undset, Nordbert Guterman, and Charles Perrault. Anyone want to start us off with what stood out to you in these reviews of these three collections of fairy tales? Anything? No one's interested in fairy tales? I knew I could count on you, Joellen.
Well, I'm not going to be very profound, but the most obvious thing, oh wait, I just got the wrong one, I think. The most obvious thing is that they're national. We have Norse fairy tales, French and Russian. And she writes about them, with some detail. The illustrations are witty and individual, etc., but they might confound a child. So she does a pretty good job keeping her eye on the audience these are intended for. But I love the generalizations, like these Russian tales are rambunctious, full-blooded, and temperamental.
Yeah, she does try to make sort of national distinctions. Clearly, the ones she thinks are best are the French fairy tales.
Yes.
Yes. But she is welcoming to all three nationalities. She talks about illustrations a lot, and I think that suggests how important illustrations are to children's literature, and that maybe we should pay a little more attention to the illustrations in the Shoebird than we have, because everywhere she talks about illustrations, especially the Doré illustrations in the French fairy tale collection, but also the illustrations that might confound a child in the book of Russian fairy tales, and then the illustrations which are conventional but pleasing in the Norse fairy tales. So she's thinking very carefully about illustrations. Alice, how important are illustrations to a writer of children's literature?
Very important. And my artist friend, Cheryl Perry, is a participant in Welty also, and she will comment next week about her illustrations for my books.
All right, good. So we're gonna, and are you thinking about illustrations as you're writing? Or do you rely on?
Definitely. I want my writing to be picturesque.
Right. Okay, good. Okay, anything else about these fairy tales reviews you want to
I
focus on?
think it's significant to note. Oh, I see a hand from Pearl.
Pearl, yeah.
But I think it's significant to note too that it's not just Eudora's children's novel, The Shoebird, that is illustrated. We also see illustrations in some of her other works as well. So, perhaps as a writer, she's thinking of the picturesque nature of her writing. For children and for older ones as well.
Well, she did draw the map for losing battles too, so that's her own personal illustration. Pearl, I'm happy to see you here. I've been waiting for you. Uh, Pearl
Thank
is Pearl is the person who has edited A Writer's Eye, which gives us uh, access to these reviews of children's literature, as well as all of what Eudora Welty's reviews. Did you want to chime in here, Pearl, about?
Yes, I really loved rereading these reviews
Me
in light
too.
of the Shoebird, which I probably hadn't reread them since since putting together A Writer's Eye. But when I was doing that, I was reading each book that she was going to review. I read it before I read her review, thinking
wow.
all the time, like, oh, I hope she likes it if I like it. I hope she doesn't like it if I don't like it, And fortunately, we were pretty much always in sync. But then I went about trying to collect all of these books. So this is backwards now, but I was in New York City. I was wandering around and I happened to go into an old bookstore and I didn't find anything that I wanted. As I left, I looked in the window and Russian Fairy Tales was right there. So I thought I would show this, even though so you could see what these kinds of illustrations are, that they were there. And the commentary that she doesn't like, that's really just at the end. And so a less astute reader would have just ignored that commentary and it wouldn't have become a problem at all. And then I wanted to point out that for Doré's illustrations of Perrault's fairy tales, she has that illustration of Puss in Boots with the real live mouse tied to his belt. That's in our Wonder World.
Oh.
So she knew that. And so when she comes to review Perrault's fairy tales with Doré's illustration, she must have just been absolutely delighted to be able to see that Doré picture of the mouse hanging from there. And so when I was looking at Welty's reviews, no, not reviews, her little society column pieces, this is, she describes Mr. Ricks at Jackson's Mardi Gras ball. She says, Mr. Ricks, in kingly stride, plumed and buckled and clad in white satin knee breeches, gold brocade, and blue velvet, are unmistakably Louis as he marched in his red heels clicking and his diamond-studded golden staff, swinging in all the vanity and triumph of a monarch he impersonated and arrayed upon himself. So this is really very much like the Puss in Boots, which she says when she reviews the Russian fairy tales or the French fairy tales, Puss in Boots in rampant pose with his sure enough boots on and a murdered mouse tied to his belt, towering there and imperiously stopping the king in his stride in the pursuit of a little scheme of his own, really looks the magnificent magical cat, fierce beyond resistance and wholly believable as a fairy character. And you can look this up on your own screen. Just look up Doré's Puss in Boots and you can see the mouse and everything there. So I was just delighted to read all of these pieces, these first fairy tales. And I was looking today in my old Excel sheet of books in Welty's library and trying to see if she had any of these books. Of course, she has Charlotte's Web still. And of these fairy tales, she only has the Perrault's French fairy tales. So The other ones she probably gave away, or ones we were going to come to that she didn't like. Certainly she gave those away.
Well, let me ask Pearl, did the spreadsheet that you're looking at, is that what's in the house currently, or is that her total collection of books?
It's probably what was in the house shortly after she passed away and the house was being organized.
Inventory.
That'd be her entire collection.
We could ask Mary Alice is here. I think, I'm not sure that inventory would have been correct or full enough at the time.
It's pretty long, and it's been very useful to me, but it doesn't seem like she kept Knock Rise or Flying Through the House or anything like that. But I hope that you did ask Mary Alice if she often passed these books on.
Suzanne, I'm here.
Yeah. Did she, when did the house get a complete inventory of the library?
It was when we had to take everything out and move it to Capers so they could work on the electrical and all of that. It wasn't a complete inventory as scholars would like to do. We were just listing the books.
Right, but the titles would have been there, yeah.
But to answer the question, there were a lot. I mean, when I stayed at the house, Liz and I would spend the night in the sun porch. There were a lot of fairy tales. I distinctly remember Russian fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, French fairy tales. So there were a lot of children's books, fairy tales in the sunroom. And over the years, when she died, even before she died, those fairy tales had disappeared, most of them. So she gave them to people.
Yeah. As one will do. I think that happened to a lot of the murder mysteries too.
Yes.
Pass them on, yeah.
Right. She loaned me all the Agatha Christie. I hope I returned them, but I'm not sure that she loaned them to other people, I'm sure.
I was really interested about the Russian book. She said she wondered if it was too expensive and weighed too much for a little girl to hold up. So she's always thinking of the child as audience for the books, and that book could prompt that sort of comment. Jo Ellen?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to point out kind of what Pearl did, that she's more familiar with the French fairy tales and is a little bit more rambunctious herself in describing them, and that she takes space from the other coverage to raise that issue about what's expensive, etc., and raise questions about folklorist comedy. There's a mild complaint there. But in the first one, in the first 5 or 6 lines, she gets to a matter of definition, which I hope we'll keep in mind as we go through here. Because, what is a fairy tale exactly? It's usually they're diminutive people, I've read, but the setting is in what seems ordinary, and the people are familiar, as is true in the Shoebird. We have an ordinary setting, and birds who are diminutive, kind of like humans. But what distinctions between fairy tales and myths and folklore and other kinds of issues about these really ancient forms of storytelling can be enlightening. And I'll have a proposal for a definition by the end of the day. But this was fun.
One other thing I want to point out, and then Pearl, is that this objection to too much learned commentary, which comes at the end of the Russian folk, is a typical Welty objection. She was not that fond of us academics and of our approaches to literature, and she's looking, I think, for warmth of response, for reader engagement by the critic, more than she is for the kind of stultifying academic commentary. Pearl?
Yeah, I have 2 comments. One, it's kind of interesting and tangential that Paul Binding, the British academic who visited Welty and then was the Welty Southern Literary Scholar or whatever at Millsaps, and wrote a biography. He's also the author of a fairly new Hans Christian Andersen biography, a big, beautiful biography. So just little connections.
I didn't know that. I'm glad to know it too. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful book. And secondly, throughout her reviews, but you especially see it here with the children's books reviews, and then of course at the end with the Oxford Companion, she's always writing as a reader. She's never writing as a writer
Right.
or an author. And she's always concerned about what the reader will perceive. And that lends itself certainly to the illustrations. What does she see? And we'll see all of that criticism in the Oxford Companion to Children's Literature.
Right. Yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, the perspective of the reader and the child reader or the child who has grown older and reading. Yeah.
I think she realizes that um, she sort of brings out her child reader self when she's reviewing a children's book or when she's reviewing a mystery. She's the mystery reader.
Yeah.
So she really identifies with the intended audience, I think.
Well, as she said about fiction, I never doubted that fiction is right as imagining yourself into lives not your own. And she's imagining herself as a reader of, and she is a reader of these of things. How would the reader respond? Now, Mary. We can't hear you, Mary. Are you
You unmute for us, Mary.
you need, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. My comment's kind of in keeping with that, and it's with regard to the Russian fairy tales. I thought it was interesting when she was talking about, how those fairy tales were combined. The storyteller was entertaining herself, Eudora, by saying, and they were often in threes. I thought that was funny.
All right. Tell us again because we missed part of what you were
Oh,
saying.
I'm sorry. It's the part, it's a part under the Russian fairy tales where
Mhm.
she's talking about the storytellers were blind men
Oh,
and they
yeah.
were often in threes. I just thought that was funny. She has a funny sense of humor.
She does, and the sense of humor comes through over and over again. Let's talk about the review of Gumbo Yaya, a book of Louisiana folklore. But it's not really discussed as a collection of Louisiana folktales. Here is a book that doesn't seem really to be a children's book. Pearl, folktales though they be. All right.
Sorry, I wanted to make one other comment
Okay,
about
go
the
ahead.
Russian tales. And thank you, Anna, for making all those photocopies. But in the footnotes, Welty had written the Aslod, which is like the Ash Girl or Cinderella, the Aslod, quote, the Aslod who made the princess say, "You lie." So she had that line in there, and the New York Times cut that line and just left Aslod. So there she's letting herself be a bit of a critic by choosing what she is quoting and showing the positive and the negative challenges, let's say, of fairy tales or folk tales wherever they are. So I just wanted to say that.
Let me point out too that if you own a writer's eye, there are great notes to it. The scholarly apparatus here is very friendly, and great notes about the changes that were made by the Times, the changes Eudora made when she republished some things in the eye of the story. Those kinds of notes are really helpful. So I recommend them to you.
If you do not own it, you can purchase it at the Eudora Welty House and Garden Gift Shop.
We're selling your books, Pearl. We're working on it here. Okay, how about Gumbo Yaya? Anyone have anything to say about the review here of Gumbo Yaya? From 1946. The 45 one was interesting. So right after the war here, this is also just after the end of the war. And here is a collection of Louisiana folk tales. Mary, did you have something about the Gumbo Yaya?
I hope I unmuted right this time.
Good.
I just loved the description she gave of it was like going through an old desk.
Yeah.
She said that some of the pieces shouldn't have really been included, but it was good. Some of it was kind of
Yeah, she's very critical of the editorial standards here. And I love that description too, that metaphor. The book is like an old desk belonging to no telling who, so outlandish occasionally are the stuffings of the pigeonholes. The accumulation is curious and interesting, but only some of it worth keeping. So, yeah. So poor editorial decision making she finds in this collection. I liked it when she said it's full of quotations, from some of the original people on this earth. Surely, she says. So, the humor of the reviewer coming through, and humor is a maybe a less devastating way of being pretty critical. Yeah, Pearl.
Yeah, so I have to admit I did not read every word in here, and I was so grateful that she found some faults with it. But I looked through it again in preparation for today, and it occurred to me we should be looking through it a little more closely because there are some things in there I'm sure that she gleaned onto since she seems to have read the whole thing. And I found the superstitions and things like that at the end to be very interesting. So I think it's a book you can pick and choose from.
It's one of the few she mentions in here that I do actually own, right? Why don't we move on to Charlotte's Web, unless anyone has anything else about Gumbo Yaya. Let me see what else I said. She says romantic, some of it is romantic or hilarious, or there is occasionally a romantic or a hilarious or a wild note here and there that justifies your looking through the book. So, yeah, can justify your looking through the book. Tracy, did you have something?
Well, I want to say that I'm I'm glad for that. Like she said, it's like the original conversations of many people that, it wasn't like edited out, but and it probably captures the true essence of the time period of the stories and the tales or these memories, I would think, that people were discussing in the book. And I really think we need more of that, more of these types of readings.
Well, we'll take your advice and Pearls, and we'll see what we can glean from a more careful reading. Let's go to Charlotte's Web. So here is a thoroughly positive review. Pearl, you want to tell us a little bit about the background of this with the New York Times?
Yes, she was pretty unhappy with all of the cuts that were made, but especially for the very beginning. And she puts her original review, which she had sent to E.B. White afterwards, to say, oh, wait, that's not exactly what I said. They cut out a lot of things, which is kind of nonsensing. I'm looking for this. But if you look at the ending, can you read the end of her review, Suzanne?
Want me to read it aloud?
Yeah, the last paragraph.
Sure.
Even just the last sentence.
At the risk of repeating myself, as the goose says, Charlotte's Web is an adorable book.
Right. So they added, I will say, Charlotte's Web is an adorable book. Or she says, I will say. They cut that out. So
yeah, I said, here it's, I'm not sure I read it. As the goose says, Charlotte's Web is an adorable book.
Right. Welty had added, I will say. So she puts herself in there as she's quoting the goose. And of course, we think of the silly goose in the Shoebird. But her opening paragraph, which is in A Writer's Eye, says, if I had the qualifications, parentheses, a set of spinnerets and the know-how, I'd put in tonight writing adorable across my web to be visible Sunday morning, hung with dewdrops for my review of Charlotte's Web. And so the ending, like repeating herself, she doesn't repeat herself in the New York Times because they cut out the first paragraph. And it's so witty.
Yeah, they cut out the beautiful symmetry and the wit of it. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, the New York Times is concerned with space, I'm sure, and so they've cut back, and there is the danger of writing for the newspaper. Yeah,
and it was already long, But I think we should also note it was before Welty was published in the New Yorker, and she had been reviewing for the New York Times. Sorry, I'm getting my things mixed up here. But anyway, they cut out a lot of her sort of witticisms and recast the characterizations. But you can read it in The Eye of the Story, and that is the one you should read. But I had to use the ones from the New York Times.
But we're reading them of the moment here. So let me just say that that first sentence does say, E.B. White has written his book for children, which is nice for us older ones, as it calls for a big type. I appreciate that more now than I did before. But I like that it's a book for children, but it's also for us older children. And I think that's one thing we can say about Eudora Welty. She kept the sort of sense of wonder, the sharpness of observation of a child as as an adult, and drew on it in her writing. Yeah, Jo Ellen.
I was just going to point out in the halfway through the page and the last page that she really doubles down on the goose who can't be surprised by barnyard ways, but he's appealing to your stomach. The goose always repeats everything. It's her idiosyncrasy, which we get repeated. And that, I mean, I just really thought, I don't know whether she reviewed or just remembered some of her material from children's books when she started thinking about the shoebird, because it's the parrot, of course, who repeats. We have this the silly goose, etc. But also at the end of the last review, Gumbo Yaya with the pigeonholes in the desk,
Yeah.
those appear again in the shoebird and of course in Optimist's Daughter, and that's something that
And,
has.
and of course, in the Eudora Welty house itself. Yeah.
Yes, yes, of course.
Uh, yeah, so the characters, I noticed the mention of the Firebird in the review of Russian fairy tales. Here we've got the goose, and we've got the pattern of repetition. So the reader who stores these things away and they come back as you need them, often not consciously, but you do have
Right.
a store of memories that you can draw on. Right. What else in Charlotte's Web? Let me read one passage to you. The characters are varied, good and bad, human and animal, talented and untalented, warm and cold, ignorant and intelligent, vegetarian and blood drinking, varied but not simple or opposites. They are the real thing. What about that? As a statement about a children's book, E.B. White's book. I mean, I think she is talking about children's literature as being fairly sophisticated, that it's not presenting a sanitized view of experience, but a complex view. The characters are varied, but not simple or opposites. So that complexity. Yeah. Tracy.
I would say she's saying that everyone is accepted. Everyone's different, but everyone's accepted even in spite of their differences, which is currently the modern thing today.
Yeah, I think she's saying more than that, but I think certainly in the Schubert, that's really an important point. But I think she's saying there's also good and bad, vegetarian and blood drinking. I mean, there is the rat in this novel, who has no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no milk of rodent kindness, no compunctions, no higher feeling, no friendliness, no anything. So
Yes. And there's good and bad in the world, and
yeah,
there always will be, and we need to learn how to deal with it.
yeah, exactly. Jo Ellen?
Maybe a precursor for the mockingbird. I just wanted to note that I think I've shared this with the group at some point, but member Susan Coombs and I had a meeting at a bookstore here named Schuler's Books, and they're just out, unfortunately, right outside the women's restroom on a wall, but it's just before you go into the children's section. There's a framed copy of the original 1952 review of Charlotte's Web from the New York Times, and a great image of the book as well. So it's kind of everywhere, but that's a special place for me.
Good, good, good. I wanted to mention also the ending of this review and see what you think about what this tells us about Eudora Welty, where she talks about this. What the book is about is friendship on earth, affection and protection, adventure and miracle, life and death, trust and treachery, pleasure and pain, and the passing of time. As a piece of work, it is just about perfect and just about magical in the way it is done. What it proves, in the words of the minister in the story, which he hands down to his congregation after Charlotte writes "some pig" in her web, is that the human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders. So, that to me is a perfectly Weltian statement. I want to focus on two things. One's the passing of time, which is so important in the shoebird and with the dodo bird, that she's talking about that. And then that human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders, that there is mystery in life, and we need to be embracing of it, aware of it. Yeah, Pearl.
I completely agree with that, and it's just so beautiful. And it also speaks to how she speaks about Wilbur. She says, when he was a baby, he was a runt, but the sun shone pink through his ears, endearing him to a little girl named Fern. She is his protector, and he is the hero. And this academic in me right away is thinking, well, wait a minute, it's named for Charlotte. But then she starts right away, Charlotte A. Cavatica, just call me Charlotte. But this is line I really love. She tells Wilbur right away that she drinks blood. So that goes back to the blood eating thing. That she drinks blood. And Wilbur, on first acquaintance, begs her not to say that.
Yeah.
She really feels these characters, and it's less anthropomorphizing than like Aesop's fables or even in the Schubert. These characters, because they're given a full story, much longer story than the Schubert. They're real.
All right. Anything else about this review of Charlotte's Web?
I would love to point out just after the bit that you quoted, Suzanne, how she's kind of like doubling up the moral here, I guess, or the theme of this children's book in the quote from Dr. Dorian. It's like he doesn't understand how the spider web, a name appeared in it, but he also doesn't understand how spider webs work anyways too. And I think that like it brings out Miss Welty's keen observation, being able to see from the perspective of a child too.
Yeah. And the wonders of our daily life. A spider web itself is a wonder. It doesn't have to have pig written in it to be a wonder. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, now, so we've had these reviews from 1952 and 1945 and 46. Now we're going to jump way ahead past the Shoebird to 1970. And the title of this is 4 reviews. It's actually 3, and then the next week or whatever, however long it was. How many, Pearl? 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, the 4th one appears. So they're here together in our book. If you're looking at your book, it's the Little Man and the Big Thief, Otto and the Magic Potatoes, Nenoch Rise, come on May 24th, and on August 16th comes Flying in the House by Betty Brock. So we've got those 4 reviews to talk about. So what about, let's start with Little Man, Big Thief. What is the note struck here in her review? It's a positive review by Eric Kastner. Pearl, you going to start us off?
Sure. you can't help but think about Acrobats in the Park.
Right.
She had written maybe her first story, but of course she must be thinking about that. And again, this diminutive size, the point is not that he's little, it's that he's real, that he's a human, and he should be treated with dignity. And I like that.
So we're back at Tracy's point is here made again for us. Yeah. She talks about there in this book, there is no talking down to children. That's I think an important thing that she's looking for, a standard she's applying. Yeah, Mary.
I guess I really like, she just is magical with description because she said it had a satisfactory plot, wheels within wheels, which just really gives you a vivid idea about the storytelling.
Yeah.
She
And
just,
that the plot for a children's book doesn't have to be simple and single. But here
yeah,
we have wheels within wheels, and she's not condescending to her children. He is not condescending to the readers who are
yeah.
children. So Ellen.
I just want to turn the page on your comment that she is commenting on the audience, occasional remarks addressed straight to the reader, nothing sugary. And at the top of the next page, into that paragraph, I love that she brings up vocabulary. It takes at least an hour and a half to read. He tells the story too with his proper vocabulary. Words like confounded effrontery. And I think of some children's books today where any word that's not, in a fifth grade reader might get cut. But there's such a good opportunity here for kids to notice new words, even to learn them, but at least to hear the way it sounds. Confounded effrontery.
Yeah. And Charlotte, who wakes up saying salutations.
Yes.
And we might say the shoebird, where the vocabulary, we talked about that. We thought maybe, is it too advanced for children? And she said, no, let's let it be. Yeah. What else about Mr. Kastner's Little Man and Big Thief? I did like that she said that although it's a very light-hearted book, that it recognizes the sadness in experience. And we have the major character crying, telling about crying as when he learned about the death of his parents. In a press conference, a forward miss in the style of her kind asked Maxie how he felt when his tiny parents were blown off the Eiffel Tower to their deaths. Did you cry very much? Maxie, in a flash, jumps right into her beehive hairdo and starts pulling it to pieces for all he is worth. There, he said afterwards, and now I shall give you your answer. Yes, at that time, I did cry very much. Bravo for Maxie. So again, that let's not condescend to children by giving them the saccharine view of experience, but let's talk about life and death and the emotions of experience. Pearl?
I think that attitude is throughout this review, but throughout all of her reviews, that she doesn't want to condescend to the reader regardless. And that in the last paragraph about this book, she says, and nothing, although nothing has been underlined, it's there for the young reader to observe for himself. In a human being, no matter if he is only 2 inches high, feelings may lie too deep for words, and actions may reach up to giant size and courage and high spirits. Such a beautiful way of expressing that, I think. It would make the reader, the parents who might read this book go, oh, I need to get this book, which is the whole point of the review. People go out and buy it. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of this one. I must have gotten these through interlibrary loan because I don't have any of them. Show you.
Alack and alas, how about Otto and the Magic Potatoes? What about the review of Otto and the Magic Potatoes? I say one thing that she does say, which is telling, the magnificent illustrations are the best part of the book. So it's a little bit damning of the text, I'd say.
I will say, William Penet Dubois then went on to write, or I'm not sure of the date, maybe before, yes, earlier. He wrote 21 Balloons. It's a kind of a fantasy based on a real geological event. And it won the Newbery Award. And then Natalie Babbitt's Nenoch Rise actually won a Newbery Honor Award. So these were important books in the canon of children's books, I think. And I think that speaks well of her being able to review them and give good points, whether she would like this book or not. And Otto he's this oversized dog who becomes, in a later generation, Clifford, that big red dog that does the same kinds of things that Otto does by saving. And it's also like Amelia Bedelia, and it's also playing on words like the shoe bird, because the potatoes cry.
Well, I love that. Out of all those eyes. Yeah.
These books, I used to be a children's librarian, and these authors in these books are still circulated today from our folk tale. They're usually cataloged in the nonfiction section for the folk and fairy tales, though, because there's like a whole Dewey Decimal section for that. So just a note there. They're still circulated.
What about Nenoch Rise? This is, to me, sort of vintage Welty when she says this. The story is thoughtfully written and written to provoke thought. To an extent, it will succeed. It does not, however, touch the feelings very deeply beyond arousing uneasiness. There's a coldness about the treatment of the characters, who are not an altogether reassuring company to begin with. They represent attitudes. Egan is given more warmth and more reality than the others. Response to that? I'm thinking that for Eudora Welty, it seems to me that this idea all needs to emerge, she believes, from the story. That an idea imposed upon a story is going to create a kind of artifice and a kind of coldness, and that the author here is too intent upon the abstraction and less focused upon the person, the character, the story. Pearl?
I love how you, Suzanne, and our other readers here are bringing attention to these reviews and showing that whether Welty's reviewing a Faulkner or a Virginia Woolf or whatever, or a children's book that we don't even remember, she is true to herself. She does not condescend to herself or to the New York Times book review, nor to the authors. She says it straight, and we really can see her sensibilities, not just as a reader, but also as a writer, just as you're pointing out. I think that's just beautifully, beautifully expressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else here on Nenoch Rise? The other thing is, yeah, go ahead, Joellen.
Go ahead, Suzanne. Say what you're going to say.
I was just going to say that she does say at the end where about children, the child reader will be aware that in the long run, the megrimnum is symbolic. The story is about the mysterious, but more than that, it's about belief in the mysterious. Do we believe in megrimnum or don't we? By placing the burden of final judgment on the child reader, the author may be wiser than she thinks. Children do know well some things that we have forgotten. And I think she sees the author as kind of dismissing any kind of mysteriousness or superstition and trying to pull us back to rationality is perhaps misguided. Yeah.
I read that section just a little bit differently, and I also wasn't especially put off by it. I was reminded of the Grimm fairy tales.
Mhm.
Or the folk tales, whatever you want to call them, where, Cinderella's sisters have their toes and heels chopped off and they were not Disneyfied. And this clearly goes in that direction. The megrimum it's a sound word that's mainly all mouth. Talking about devouring, and it's fee fi fo fum in that line. But I kind of like, she does dramatize it. It might hit people over the head, but she kind of dramatizes with Uncle Ot, the themes that are to be, carried out. Uncle Ot tells his nephew, who's climbed up and found out he's alive there, and the Megrim hasn't eaten anybody apparently, that there isn't any Megrim, never was. It's all been just a lot of nothing for these years. And a natural spring that sulfur is nasty but not unnatural. The nephew's going to tell them, and Uncle Ot says there's always the possibility that they're happier believing. And I think that's actually quite profound. I'm not entirely sure what a child would make of it, and that may be partly what we're talking about here too. But
I think, yeah, that, it's what it seemed to me is that she's saying, and I haven't read the book, Pearl may have to help me out, but it seems to me she's saying in the book, the author is trying to show us that people kind of cherish their superstitions, they're happier believing in them, but it's unfounded, and there's this kind of greater faith in the rational. But she's saying that maybe that's the rational is not all that there is, that maybe children have a sense of, and it's not merely superstition, but there are things that are mysterious, unknowable as well.
mhm.
My
And I read that first.
Maybe I'm misreading the review.
No, I don't know, but I did read that second paragraph from the last. Um, do we believe in the Megrimum or don't we? By placing the burden of final judgment on the child reader, the author may be wiser than she thinks. Children do know well some things that we have forgotten.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
So,
interpreted that just a little
yeah.
more positively, I think.
I agree with that. Go ahead.
Go
I
ahead.
don't remember reading this book, but I'm thinking also the child gets to keep a secret, and secrets are very important to children.
Yes.
It's mysterious, but also he knows something that others don't, and the power of holding that in is powerful too.
Good point.
Anna, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
I agree with that. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe that Miss Welty has also talked a little bit about the short story, The Lady and the Tiger. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but like that's kind of placing that burden on the reader. And I think that there's something to appreciate about leaving things ambiguous.
Leaving them ambiguous, yeah. Well, certainly Eudora Welty believes in doing that. And the unresolvability, yeah. All right, shall we move to Flying in the House?
Just a second, Suzanne, I just wanted to draw attention back to the fact that that review was written in 1970, and there's so much more in it than we saw before, as there is in the one we're going to, which was written in 1984.
Yeah, we'll be going to that pretty soon, the Oxford Companion. Before we move to the Oxford Companion, let me just give a chance for anyone to say something about Flying in the House by Betty Brock and the review of this story.
Oh.
I do love that Mrs. Vancourt in the story says, Vancourts do not fly. So
Oh.
I wish I could kiss my elbow and take off.
Was that on the list? I didn't read that.
And I think it was on the list, was it?
It was only included in the scans because I noticed a discrepancy between having, whenever I was making the scans, having it said 4 reviews by Eudora Welty, and then The Little Man and the Big Thief, Otto and the Magic Potatoes, and Me Neck Rise. That's only 3 books. And so when I was making the scans, I noticed that No Flying in the House says 4 young readers. And I was like, perhaps I've overlooked something. So I included it in the scans and hoped people might see it, but it was not on the official reading list. So that would be my bad.
All right, so maybe we haven't seen this one. Let me read just the last paragraph, and then I'm going to let Pearl comment. Mrs. Vancourt, she is the sensible guardian of the child, is reliably obtuse about either children or fairies. But in the end, she is changed by the wand, not that of the fairies, but the real wand of human affection. Fairy magic is wondrous, but may be chill. Warmth comes only from the mortal side, from the human heart. Annabelle chooses well. All right, Pearl?
I was just going to say that on the scans that Anna made, it's the very next page. So you didn't know to read it, but it's right there. So you can go back and read it.
So it's there for you, yeah.
So Mrs. Van Court, I think the key word in that first sentence that you read is reliably. In other words, she sticks to the character the way she's supposed to stick, that reliably obtuse. And then the beautiful, very Weltian sentiment about warmth and coming from the human heart. I mean, that's very Welty.
I'm often reliably obtuse as well, so I sympathize with Mrs. Van Court. Let's go to the last review and talk about Innocence, Sin, and J.D. Salinger from 1984. So the same year that One Writer's Beginnings was published. The previous reviews published in 1970, the same year Losing Battles was published. So here we have the Oxford Companion to Children's Literature. What stands out in this review?
That she doesn't like it.
I'm telling you, if I had been one of the editors of this book, I would be mortified by that review. So yeah, this is a book that comes in for some serious criticism. For instance, at the end of the first page, it might be said that the subject, she's quoting, by the Opie's day, the editors say, children's books became the focus of countless courses, conferences, centers of study, and works of scholarship. It might be said that the subject reached maturity. And then parenthetically, Welty says, could it also be said that the heart of a reader sinks? Okay, so the subject reaching maturity and the heart of the reader sinks. So what about the evaluation of this book? Mary?
So the very last line, she says, but the absence of some central love of literature that would have warmed the whole. It was like she put a
In all of my
I
conversations,
just felt like she didn't like it.
right, I was going to say, in all of my conversations over years of friendship with Eudora Welty, were two things that I knew exactly. If Eudora Welty said someone lacks imagination, that was damning. That was about as bad as it could be if you lacked imagination. And the other was that we would always talk about books that we loved. The love of literature was crucial. And I had a student one time when he went to graduate school, and they were talking about why are you undertaking the graduate study of English? And he said, because I love reading. And he was mocked for saying that. Eudora Welty would not mock him for saying that. She would say, this is exactly the right reason, which is what I would say as well, the love of literature. So that trying to turn the reader into a professional, dispassionate, unimaginative, uninvolved individual is what she really objects to, I think. So, yeah, Pearl?
And also how ridiculous to waste the reader's time on how much money they made. She hits that point multiple times on how ridiculous that is to include, pointing out, the academics, the scholarly ridiculousness of it. But I will say she has the same criticism of one of the academic books about Isaac Dinesen, that there was no love of the work, no love of the literature. And so it was just icy and cold and analytic rather than loving. But we've seen through all of these that she's not overly appreciative. So she's not just, saying everything is good, writing to some mythical audience that wants to hear how great something is. She is discerning. And in here we see her greatest discernment in her very last book review. And I think a couple of things here. Since this is her last one, it is longer than typically, but because it was so distressing and so unpleasant, it's my idea that she said, okay, well, forget that. I'm not going to do these anymore because that was too much a waste of my time. It's too sad.
Jo Ellen?
I do want to stand up for scholars a little bit, though. This book is
Yeah,
clearly
good.
not
Well,
intended for children.
we don't want to diss ourselves too much. Yeah.
No, not completely. So she clearly missed more felt responses on the part of the compilers. But this isn't a collection of fairy tales for children to read. It's about the history, et cetera, et cetera. Take her point about paying maybe a little more attention to the responses from children themselves. But in the last paragraph, she suggests okay, who's this for? The librarians, collectors, rare book dealers, thesis writers, yes, and then dismisses them. All of these from now on, but hardly for the children is a reference book. Is it a reference book? But if a book concerns children, it should be theirs to consult. Well, maybe, maybe not. One hoped for a book they could read and live with that would nourish their love for reading. That's a totally different book. So I think it was her failure to recognize the nature of this kind of companion.
She does recognize, and I thought it was really interesting that the book provides, even though it's a alphabetized reference book, it provides a real sense of history of children's literature and the way children's literature developed over time and the emergence of the fairy tale into print and of writers like Lewis Carroll. And I think she did give it grudging approval for that, for providing that sort of sense of history. And I think, Jo Ellen, your point, I agree with in a sense that this is a different sort of book. There are two kinds of, you could have a reference book for children, but this is a different sort of reference book. On the other hand, evaluating books by their reputation, by their popularity, by their earnings, seems to me to be a questionable standard, which she finds seems to pervade.
Do they actually evaluate according to that, or is it presented as information? I don't remember.
I think Eudora feels that they're evaluating
Yeah,
it.
certainly.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We'll ask our authority here. Pearl, what do you
Yeah, you hit upon something I had studied. I think that Welty is in that last paragraph, and we'll see this again when we read Sweet Devouring. I think she's thinking back about our Wonder World volumes, or those kinds of collections and encyclopedia type things that she was reading and enjoying. And we'll see that more when we read A Sweet Devouring for the next time. But I think it could have been a more positive review if they hadn't slammed or negated or skimmed over some of her favorites, such as Edward Lear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And E.B. White, both. Yeah.
Yes, as in E.B. White and even J.D. Salinger. I mean, in the collection, you can read what she wrote about Salinger's short stories and what she also wrote about Edward Lear.
Yeah, to cast J.D. Salinger as sort of the decline of children's literature, she does object strenuously to that. Yeah. Jo Ellen?
I just found the paragraph on page 242, second from the bottom, where she's talking about the extravagant attention the editors pay Walt Disney and his employment of tales, etc. What's phenomenal. It says, he has given space for his own statement. Be commercial. What is art anyway? It's what people like. And that is the beginning stance of Arturo in the Shoebird, no doubt she noticed, where he learns there's a little bit something more than that. But I love about halfway up that page, the two-line paragraph, which strikes me as almost the most damning. Says, she's talking about Sendax and other illustrations, but the pictures are here in the book. ample in size and well reproduced, without any need of editorial help. They speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Which I both, I understand, but I agree and disagree with, but it's funny.
Well, I think it is, we're out of time, I think, but I think those of us in academic recognize the need for scholarly books about the history of children's literature. And but on the other hand, this one seems to have made some pretty serious errors in judgment, and its own standards seem at times questionable. Pearl.
I will say when I first approached Welty about collecting these reviews, she, dismissed it. Like, why would you want to do that? That they were just ephemera. But I'm glad that she acquiesced and allowed me to do it, and that she, I believe, was pleased with the book.
I'm sorry, what?
She was pleased with the book, even though.
I remember the publication party for it well, and she looked pleased that day. Yeah.
Let me tell that story for a minute. So, I was behaving and doing my homework. I didn't go over to Welty's house or bother her or anything when Lemuria was having a big birthday party and this book was coming out. But Suzanne comes through the crowd, ushering Miss Welty in, and Welty comes to me and I come to her and she says, "Do you like it?" Like, would I like it? Of course. So she says, "Do you like it?" I said, "Yes, I do."
She wanted to celebrate the editor. What? That's a triumph there. All right. So next time we're going to talk about some essays about children's literature. Alice is going to report on her, and we have someone experienced with the office supply company who's going to tell us about the selling of books at the office supply company in Jackson. So we'll do all of that next time if we finish up our sessions on the Shoebird. Thank y'all.
Thank you guys. Make sure to check your email for links to the readings. So you'll find a Sweet Devouring as well as On Fairy Tales there and a couple of extras I included. Thank you guys.
Bye.